let's get into talking about OKRs for product teams. As I mentioned, and I put a link into the chat, I'm going to be taking questions at the end. And so I've set up a Slido Q&A for you. You can go to slido.com and put in this hashtag, or you can just put your phone up to this QR code and it'll take you straight there. Put in your questions, vote up other people's questions. Feel free to do it all the way through this so that we can handle the most frequent questions at the end. So why do I want to talk about OKRs? I wrote a book a few years ago about product roadmaps, and in it, one of the key concepts that I think must be incorporated into any given roadmap is, what are your objectives, especially what are your business objectives and your customer objectives. And OKRs are actually my favorite tool for expressing those business objectives that inform your roadmap. And they become really popular. There's a huge amount of demand, and I've been working of interest in it. And I've been working with a bunch of companies over the past few years on setting up their OKRs and setting up things specifically for their product teams to be able to use OKRs effectively. They're, I think, a natural fit for product teams that are goal-oriented, which is the way I like to see them. And they map directly to your objectives in your roadmaps. But I think, honestly, that John Doerr got a few things wrong, especially where product teams operating today need to adapt the basic principles of OKRs to their work and their style of working. So I want to go into some of those things you're going to need to consider when adopting OKRs at the product team level today. That's the main focus of this talk. Before I get into that, I just want to define our terms. Objectives and key results, or OKRs, are they have these two components, right? They are a system for aligning your team on what they want to accomplish, and they have these two components. The first is the objective, and the objective is it's what you want to accomplish. It's hopefully inspirational, but it might be a little bit fuzzy. It's something that you're all reaching for, and it's snappy, and it's like a slogan. We're going to really nail it. But because that inspirational aspect can come with a little bit of fuzziness, they're paired with very measurable key results. The key results are not a list of things to do. This is important, an important distinction here. They are the measurement of success. They are the proof that you have actually succeeded in reaching your objective. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say that you're launching a new app, or you've already launched it, and you want to go from it's out there to getting some real traction. That's inspirational, right? Let's get some real traction. Let's make this thing grow. But how do we measure traction? How do we make it unambiguous whether we've got real traction or not in some measurable way? So I want to pair these KRs, this objective, with at least one, hopefully a few KRs. A key result might be that we're going to increase the daily active users from some small number we have today to some more ambitious high number that helps us feel like, okay, that sounds like traction. If we can hit Y, we've got some traction. Now, daily active users by itself might not, though, feel like a complete or well-rounded way of measuring traction. So we might say, well, we also want to increase conversion. Let's say we have a freemium version of our app from free to paid. If we can increase our conversion rate from some paltry sub 1% number to something healthier, then we can say, okay, well, we've started the wheel of making some actual money. And that also feels like we're getting some real traction. And we might even take it a little bit further and say, we need to not just increase the conversion rate, but we need to put enough energy into volume that we're going to get a minimum number of paying customers up to some volume that tells us, hey, this thing is for real. We really do have traction. So these three KRs kind of round each other out, balance each other, and say it's not just It's not just free members, it's paying members, and we're not overpaying to get people up that ladder to converting. So objective, what we ultimately want to accomplish, expressed in simple language, that we are trying to get traction, and then the details about how we're going to measure it and prove to ourselves that we have achieved it. So that's my simple 101 introduction to OKRs. How do we actually apply that at a product team? I promise Parvesh will come to that question about baselining. Do put that into the Slido if you have a second, because that's a popular question. These are the 5 things I want to go over about adapting adapting OKRs to product teams. Outcomes is the first and most important one. The thing about OKRs that people most frequently mistake is it's not about what you do, it's about the outcome of what you do. My friend Felipe Castro is very clear on this in his Beginner's Guide to OKRs. An objective is not a thing you do. It's actually the outcome of what you did. It's the result. It's the measurement of, we did it and therefore this happened. Let me give you an example. Managing to objectives or outcomes is not, we launched the thing. It is maybe we launched the thing in order to increase some number, some result, signups, say, by 25%. That's better. At least it couples the two together. But a really great KR is simply to increase signups by a measurable percentage. And then we can have a discussion about, well, the features of the new version 4.1 that we were considering, do we think those will really help to increase signups? Do we have evidence that in testing that actually occurs? Or is there some better way to increase signups? Could marketing do something quick? Or could we host a special event? Or is there something that we could do? Let's have a debate about the long list of ideas for what we could do that would increase signups, if we agree that that's the most important thing. So my friend Shobit Chugh, former Google product manager, says, even at Google, they're not always good at this, that they often take a look at the things, the features, the work on the backlog and say, oh, let's just make that into our OKRs. And that really is backwards. We really should be thinking, what are our goals? What does success look like? And then looking at the backlog and asking ourselves, do we think any of these things might help, rather than the other way around? I've asked people all the time, tell me, what are your goals? And a lot of the time, and this gets to Parvesh's question, people will say, well, we've got a new initiative and we just need to launch our MVP of that new product or feature or something like that. And I say, that's not an objective. Launching it is a means to an end. What are you hoping will occur? And then frequently, having heard the idea that you need to measure things, they'll say, well, okay, if that's not it, then maybe we need to ship 3 features. Yeah, we'll be successful if we ship a number of features, or we have a set of innovations, right? That's cool. That's measurable. It's got a number, but that's not really it either. Again, those are a means to an end. They're probably not bad ideas, but how will we judge whether those ideas, whether the MVP or the features in the MVP were successful? We ought to be able to get a result like onboarding customers. If we ship an MVP, and if it really is viable, if those are the right features, then customers ought to be willing to use it and buy it. And so if we can onboard them, even just a few of them, then that is success. And that is a measurable outcome. That isn't just something with a number on it. And that's what we're looking for. So when someone says, what if we can't baseline it? I say, well, you can fall back to, let's start the learning process and get some baselines by getting a few customers onto it, getting a few tire kickers going at all. So that's that. I wanted to be really clear what we mean when we say that OKRs are about results and about outcomes. The next thing I want to talk about is ideas. One way to really ensure that your KRs are about outcomes and not things to do or outputs is actually to have a separate bucket for the ideas. To have 3 buckets to say we got objectives, we got key results, and we've got ideas. Ideas are the answer to the question, what might we do to achieve our OKRs? So for example, if we had an objective to increase daily active users, what might we do? Well, there's lots of good ideas. We might implement push notifications or create special events or make customer support more accessible if it turns out there's a problem with people abandoning because they can't figure out how to use certain features, or create a loyalty program of some kind. These are all valid ideas, and what we need to do is to compare them to the goal of increasing daily active users and ask ourselves, what's our quickest path and our surest path to meeting that goal out of this whole list or some other ideas that we come up with? These things might all be on the backlog as valid things to do. Let's pick the ones, let's bring out the ones that are most likely to make a difference. Again, I want to reiterate that it's important to start with your OKRs and to move from there to developing or choosing ideas to implement and to measure the results of and see if they in fact do move your OKRs. And if they don't, well, maybe you need to recalibrate. Maybe these were the wrong ideas, or maybe your KRs were set incorrectly. And then you're going to repeat that. That's your iteration cycle. The middle part of this, where you develop the ideas, ship them, measure the results, compare them to the OKRs, is your sprint cycle. I want you to think about having every 2 weeks a check-in on your results to date and what did you learn from that. The OKRs don't come after the ideas. It's the other way around. Now, I said there are 3 buckets, right? Actually, I'm going to give you a 4th one. And I call this 4th bucket health metrics. Health metrics are unlike OKRs. OKRs are about the most important things that you want to change, the numbers you want to raise or lower, right? Well, health metrics are actually the things that you don't want to change. They are the things that you want to get and keep into a healthy range, like a minimum amount of cash to meet payroll, or your uptime SLAs of a certain number of 9s, or your ticket resolution time for help desk, or your employee morale numbers. These are things that, as long as they're in range, I don't want them cluttering up your OKRs. They're things to keep an eye on in the background. I want you, if they fall out of range, I want you to jump right on it. And I want it actually, if your health metrics fall out of range, like your uptime SLAs, if you're just down, well, of course, everybody is going to drop what they're doing on their OKRs or their ideas, and they're going to try to get the system back up again so that you can meet your obligations. And so health metrics do trump OKRs, but ideally they are separate. And as I said, health metrics usually have a healthy range that they're in, like app store ratings of 4 to 5, SLAs of a certain number of 9s, et cetera. And as long as you're in the range, you can just monitor them and not worry about having to change them. Okay, 4 buckets. And in fact, these 4 buckets make for a nice 2x2 grid that you can use and put on the wall, or people can pin up to their cube, or you can actually have live monitors running. At any given moment, I would love to see a team have a small number, no more than 3, maybe even less, of OKRs and some health metrics, maybe 2 or so key health metrics. And then, of course, there are a bunch of ideas of things that we could do. Essentially, this is your backlog to try to meet the OKRs, or ideas to ensure the safety, the continued health of our health metrics if necessary. And then in any given sprint, we can say, all right, which ideas do we want to try now? Oops, wrong way. Which ideas do we want to try next for this sprint to help us move toward our OKRs? So these are my favorite 4 buckets. 2 of them, the health metrics and the ideas, complement the OKRs. They're not technically part of the OKR canon, but I've found them to be extremely helpful for product teams to allow them to focus on the few things they most need to change and keep them outcome-based in the OKRs. So I want to talk next, having talked about those elements, those 4 buckets, about progress review. One of the things that I think teams often mistake about OKRs is that they're there to actually help you run your sprints and your planning all throughout the quarter as a product team. They're not there to set at the beginning of the quarter, put them on the shelf, and then take a look at and grade at the end of the quarter, and that's it, so that you can plan the next one. They're actually there to guide your actions throughout the quarter. So I don't want you to review, as some teams do, sort of as a nod to old-fashioned management by objectives. I don't want you to measure annually or quarterly or monthly. My sweet spot is to measure at least every couple of weeks the progress against your OKRs. And you might say, oh, some of these things move really slowly, like annual renewal rates or something like that. But I want you to pick things that you actually can make an effect on inside of a 2-week cycle, so that you can judge whether the things you're working on are making a difference. That's the whole idea behind agile sprints. Is we build something, we deploy it, we see whether it's actually working to make a difference, to help us getting to our goals. So let's just incorporate measuring the OKRs into our regular sprint cadence, or maybe even faster. I talked to one team just this morning who was saying, yeah, we're talking about our OKRs and updating the data at the beginning of every weekly team meeting. So the most mature teams push that measurement cycle as fast as possible, because what they're doing when they do that is they're pushing their learning cycle. And the faster you learn, the faster you're going to be making progress. So what does that look like? A progress review meeting. A progress review meeting doesn't have to be some new ceremony that you add into all the meetings you already have to have. You can just kick off your regular sprint review or planning or team meeting with, where are we on the OKRs? And that can actually frame up the rest of the conversation about whatever you need to do to maximize your achievement of the OKRs. After all, if you've set them correctly, then they are your priority list. And anything that's not going well in your OKRs should be discussed in the team meeting, right? So here's the order of things that I suggest. So many teams start their team meetings with essentially a round of status. And status is usually meant progress against work, against deadlines. And I don't want you to start that way. If you're going to really embrace the OKR world and practice, you start off with, how are we doing on our results to date, on the KRs, on the measurable results, and also the health metrics in case any of them are in the red. And then we go to, okay, which of those is in trouble, and what work are we doing in order to try to make a difference in those OKRs. From there, we want to talk about, what have we learned? What have we learned from the results to date? And what have we learned from the progress on the ideas to date? We may have learned that some of our ideas were great and we want to double down on them because they really are driving results. Or we may have learned that some of them are not so great, that despite our best efforts and despite what we thought, deploying this new feature is not actually making any difference. And we may choose to, rather than refine that feature, if we've done some interviews that tell us this is not really what customers want and need, but we've learned what they do want and need, well, why would we stick to the way the backlog was prioritized before we learned that? Let's reprioritize the ideas to take advantage of that learning to get us to our OKRs. So let's then decide what changes are we going to make to our backlog, to the ideas that we're pursuing, in order to make sure that we maximize our chances of achieving the OKRs and maintaining the health metrics. On the other hand, sometimes you find out that one of the things you learn is that your objectives or your KRs were unrealistic, in which case you actually can, during the quarter, change the goalposts. I know that sounds like cheating, but sometimes you, especially early days with a new product or a new feature, you haven't calibrated the OKRs quite right. And so there's this process you can go through called recalibration for your OKRs. When Google was first working on Chrome, the browser, they set ambitious targets for some millions of users in the first year, and they didn't make it. So did they abandon hope? No, they changed the date. They said, okay, we'll try to make it in the second year. And actually, they didn't make it in the second year either. They recalibrated again, but they did make it in the third year, because it was still their measure of success, was to get to a certain number of users. Or you can rewrite the objective to reflect learning, or the KRs. And I know it sounds a little bit like cheating, but let me tell you a quick story about why it's important to not stick to your original OKRs despite what you've learned. I worked with this one company where they had set all the expectations on one number, on multiplying a particular number by 10 in the year. And they found out after they had set the OKRs somewhere in February that the baseline number that they were working with was all wrong. It was actually, they were measuring it incorrectly. They hadn't screened out for bots that were crawling their site. And it turned out that the real number was about 1/10 of what they thought it was. And so their 10x number had just become a 100x number, a 100x goal that they needed to hit. And everybody sat back and said, oh, well, 10x was really ambitious. 100x it's just impossible. There's just no way. And they kind of froze at that moment. They kind of said, well, we don't know what to do. We already talked about the goal and we don't think we're allowed to change it. So they didn't. And the result was that everyone abandoned the OKRs. They just basically said, well, it's impossible, so I'm not working on it. And they went on and did other things that they thought were useful, but not in a coordinated or planned fashion. OKRs are meant to create alignment around a small set of really important numbers we want to change on the team. And by not recognizing that they had learned something significant about their situation that should have resulted in a change to the OKRs, by not recognizing that, they lost the benefit of having the OKRs at all. That kind of learning is more important than the goals themselves. The last thing I want to talk about is teams. I think one of the most important things to realize is that when you're creating OKRs for cross-functional teams like product squads, crews, scrum teams, whatever you want to call them, is that we need to set these goals at the team level. John Doerr in his book talks about his favorite example is the football team general manager who is supposed to win the Super Bowl and fill the stands. And so he cascades those objectives down through the organization, layer by layer, to departments, the coaching department and the PR department, who then cascade them down to individual contributors on their teams. And frankly, I hate this example. I think it's all wrong. It actually reinforces functional silos. Try to translate this into a software company. It's going to be the marketing department's goals, the sales department's goals, the engineering department's goals, and the product goals, and they're all going to be different. And yeah, they sort of tie together at the top, but you can just imagine, and you probably have experienced the situation where you say, oh, I'm working on my OKRs, so leave me alone. I don't have time to help you with your OKRs. And that's not the team sort of atmosphere that we want. So let's not do that. Marty Kagan says, and I think he's right, the key to doing OKRs right in a product organization is to focus your OKRs at the team level. My favorite example is Ilkka Paananen, CEO of Supercell. Supercell is this company that makes mobile games, and all they do is set up teams of 5 to 7 people and say, go make a game, and here's how we measure success in making a game. Make an awesome game, that's the objective, and the key results, there's a bunch of numbers that they are pursuing. And those cross-functional teams can do whatever else they want in terms of features, design, marketing, whatever, in order to make that game successful. And it's worked for Supercell. They're the guys behind Boom Beach, Clash Royale, Clash of Clans, the most successful online mobile games ever. And they were at one point the fastest growing game company in the world. So to get the alignment that we're talking about, I want you to not cascade goals. I want you to align them. Think about, let's say there are some company goals, and they are hopefully not too many, maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 at the most. And then you've got a bunch of teams and they've got their OKRs. Do we cascade them directly from one to the next and then down to the people? Well, first of all, let's not cascade them down to individuals at all. Let's let's keep it at the team level. But then let's seek rough alignment between what the teams are putting together and what the company is aiming for. So for example, let's say at the company level, there's a market share goal. Team A might decide we're going to go for daily active users and conversion rate. Those will push, they're not exactly derivative of market share, but they will push market share by creating a more engaged, larger customer base. Similarly, Team B, if they're working on something brand new, it will expand the customer base by getting the first 1,000 downloads. And then Team C, if they've got a more mature product, they just want to reduce churn, that too will support the goals of the company. So these are the 5 things to keep in mind. Focus on outcomes, separate out the ideas, separate out the health metrics, review progress at least every 2 weeks, and keep them at the team level. Now, I know that was quick. We only have a total of 35 minutes, and I wanted to leave at least a few for questions. So I've got a quick survey for you on what else you want to hear about. You can use this QR code right now to take this survey, and I'll ask you what you liked about this talk, what was missing from this talk, and if I were to do a public workshop to go deeper into OKRs, what would you want us to cover and when would you want it to be? And I would appreciate any and all feedback. I read all of these survey results. That would be super helpful for me. And in the 5 minutes we have left, I would love to go to the Slido and see what questions we can cover right here and right now. Here is that Slido QR again, or you can go to slido.com and put in the hashtag 76923. Let me put it also in the direct link to the survey. I think I got it. That's the Slido again. Let me get the survey for you. Copy and stop sharing. Chat. There's the survey link. Okay, I'm going to take a few of the questions until they throw me out. Top question with 4 people asking is, how do OKRs relate to KPIs and MBOs? Can you use all 3 at different levels? In my mind, OKRs are a replacement for MBOs. MBOs is an old-fashioned, very hierarchical, very slow-moving, like quarterly or annual sort of way of measuring success. And OKRs are, in my mind, a more refined version of that approach. I wouldn't, MBOs, one significant difference is that they are often tied to comp. And I really don't want you to tie OKRs to comp. That leads to gaming the system. MBOs often are also cascaded down to the individual level. And again, these are about teams. So just to come right out and say it, I say abandon MBOs and use OKRs in their place. The other question though about KPIs is KPIs, key performance indicators, are kind of those health metrics. They are we on track for our basic operating numbers, KPIs? And often KPIs, unfortunately, they have a tendency to bloat into dozens and dozens of numbers that we're constantly watching, whether they're relevant or we want to change them or not. Again, I would say KPIs are a more generic term for the numbers we watch, whereas OKRs are about which ones do we want to change, by how much, and in what period of time. Okay, next question. In your experience, why do companies still often mistake outputs for outcomes when it comes to setting objectives? Great question. I love this. I think it's habit. I think we just are all used to making a list of things to do, right? Also, it's easier. It's easier to say, well, obviously we should fix this problem, or sales just came and demanded this feature, or why don't we just make that? It's far harder to think about strategically what result are we looking for, and then examine each idea and compare it to that. It takes more mental bandwidth. It takes more alignment and discussion. It takes more analysis and strategy. And strategy's hard. And so people avoid it. And so they're like, well, this list of stuff looks like it's good stuff to do, and we can unambiguously declare victory if we do them. So it's also safer to just say, well, I did my part. We shipped the feature. Somebody else is responsible to make it successful, right? Well, no, actually. The product team's job, between product, engineering, design, all of us, is to make the product successful, to make it work for the customer, which makes it work for the business. So let's set the real goals. The last one I'll take real quick. Can you provide some OKR examples for mature B2B products? Sure. A lot of the ones I did were B2C today because everybody's kind of familiar with them. B2B ones would be more like NPS, which is a leading indicator if you measure it frequently, but also renewal rate and churn they're lagging, but they're really important. You can also today in B2B SaaS products, you can measure active users, which are again a leading indicator for churn. You can also measure margin. A lot of companies are doing that in B2B too, especially in SaaS where the margin isn't infinite because you've got to support the customer as well. There's a temptation in B2B because things move more slowly and because we don't have the high volumes of, oh, we have thousands of users and we can do a quick A/B test of B2C, but there are lots of things like that that you can actually measure. You can also measure for a new feature you're about to ship, successful usability tests. 8 out of 10 customers completed the workflow as designed before you go ahead and build it.